Bonnie is quite an interesting character because there are many different interpretations of her depending on what you think and what you decide. For example, the main one is whether she is autistic or not. Um, some examples of why she might be is that she's quite factual about everything and doesn't seem to pick up on emotions very well. Um, However, male and female symptoms of autism are very different because females tend to hide it more. They tend to put on a alter ego almost, so that they don't seem autistic to other people. Um, but a lot of people say this is just because society looks down on females, and it's their way of trying to combat that and make them seem more normal because are already female, so if they're autistic as well, then society could look down on them even more. However, this is based in the future, so that could have changed at this point, which means that she could be autistic. Um, Autism in females, their main symptoms are that they don't tend to look people in the eye. They feel very overwhelmed when they're asking multiple questions at the same time. And they find socialising to be very anxiety producing, and they often don't seek out socialising. For Bonnie, most of these tend to fit because with the socialising one, she says in scene 4 that she doesn't like surprises, which could link to the fact that she has social anxiety or some sort of autism. Because if she knew that Joe was coming around, that she could mentally prepare for it. But because she didn't, then she couldn't, and she was totally taken by surprise. And she doesn't like that because then her autism might show a bit more, which it does in that scene. Um, for being asked multiple things at the same time, that could kind of link to scene 12, when she has quite a lot of things she needs to do and she has to choose between them. And then Luke comes in constantly asking her, oh, can you go check on my mother? Can you go check on my mother? And for Bonnie, that could be quite overwhelming for her. Because she then has to decide what takes priority and what she should do. Because she wants to make sure that all the patients are well and are okay and can survive. But then again, she also has to make sure that the patients' relatives and family are okay, because otherwise she wouldn't be upholding her job. And then the fact that they don't look people in the eye, that's often done, or at least I accidentally acted it that way sometimes for some scenes, such as scene 4, when Jo is holding a fish, she looks a lot more towards the fish than at Jo herself, which could be because that Bonnie wouldn't like to look people in the eye if she was autistic. Bonnie tends to show a lot more of the male symptoms, however, being very obvious about her autism and being quite factual. But as I said before, it could just be because they're in the future and there's no longer that societal pressure of females being very strong and independent. Therefore, she embraces it more and allows herself to show it more. And on the emotion side of things, because autistic people are often quite bad at emotions, they don't really understand them. And they either don't feel them or don't recognise what they do feel. It could just be that she's not used to the emotions because of her past, and she builds them up for too long, and then they explode out sometimes in anger phases, such as scene 10 or scene 12. However, the bottling of emotions up can also be an autistic trait, because just because autistic people don't always recognise what the emotions might be, if they don't act upon them at times, then they will slowly build up and they can have an outburst as well. So for Bonnie to be autistic, it would fit quite well. However, she shows male symptoms a lot more than female symptoms. So you have to balance that up and decide which one is more likely as to whether the society has changed so much in the 30 years that she is in the future, or whether she isn't autistic but she's just misunderstood and not quite it doesn't quite act like a normal person might act. Another reason why she's quite an interesting character is because there's an argument as to whether she's depressed or suicidal. Some reasons why she might seem that way is because she doesn't tend to socialise that much. Her history is full of it, so it can be passed down through the generations. She wants to get sterilised, and she never tends to show happiness that much in scenes. What I was thinking was that maybe every time she sees a child or thinks of children, she could become slightly more suicidal, thinking, well, what happens if I do? It's happened for 2 generations, so what will happen if she has a child? Will she follow along in their footsteps, or will she create her own path? I feel like she'll be very scared of having a child. And that's why she wants to get sterilised, because she could think that if she has a child, then she'll become suicidal and leave them. And after the sterilisation, she seems a lot steadier and normal, because she's eventually able to give up the house and sell it, which shows that possibly she's only suicidal because of the thought of carrying on this family's legacy of mothers committing suicide. She also seems very scared to let things go, as they could send her off the edge. For example, with Jo, in scene 10, while she's shouting at her, it also seems like she doesn't actually want Jo to go. While she's constantly telling her to get out, I feel like inside she's thinking the complete opposite. She's terrified to let Jo go, and the only way she can express that is by telling her to go, because she's scared that if she doesn't tell her to go, then Jo will leave on her own, and then that could potentially be even worse for Bonnie than if it was Bonnie's fault. But after scene 15, when she potentially did get sterilised, and I think that she did because of the way she acts in scene 16, when she does eventually allow herself to sell the house, I think it shows that she's kind of gotten over the fact that she's stopped this legacy of her generations and her family. So I feel like it's her admitting to herself that it's alright that this house can be sold, and it's alright if she lets things go, because she has stopped this this family's journey, and she's stopped everything that could happen in the future, and therefore she's alright to let things go. Another lot of options is to do with Jo, because there are quite a few questions to do with her that we never really find out, such as whether Bonnie actually cares towards Jo, or whether she just uses her as support. Because in scene 4, it seems like while she does care for Jo, and while she does kind of want her there, she also just used her that one time to help her get along with this, because Jo brought up her dad, which may have caused this wave of emotions, and then Bonnie realised that possibly just sleeping with Jo might get rid of them, because she can concentrate on something else for a while. And then Jo turns up out of nowhere, and Bonnie seems quite against that, despite the fact that it looks like she's only against the fish. I think she's also against Jo almost being there, because it doesn't seem like a very normal reaction. Even if you hate fish completely, it doesn't seem like it would affect you in that way just because someone's turned up. So I feel like Bonnie never expected Jo to turn up, because she just used her for that one night, and she was a one-night stand at that point. However, by the end of the scene, it seems like Bonnie does want Jo to stay, and she does want a relationship with her and a future with her, which completely contradicts what it could also mean. So I feel like her relationship with Jo is very confusing, because there are times when it seems like Bonnie really does care about her, but there are also times when it seems like Bonnie's only using her slightly. In scene 9, Bonnie seems very cold towards her and brushes her off a lot. That could be because of why they broke up. But it could also be because Bonnie realises that Jo doesn't bring any good, she's just a distraction to everything. And while a distraction is what she wants, it's not what she needs, and she knows that at this point. Because she's moved back into the house and realises what she has to do. And she never really says to Jo that, in the scene anyway, that she really wants to be with her. She just says okay to the fact that Bonnie is better than any other relationship Jo has been in since. So I feel like Bonnie is just... she's finally come to terms with what she has to do, and Jo is very much a distraction to all of that. So while Bonnie could care about Jo, she still needs to do what she has to, and Jo might be against that. And that could be why she could have realised that by scene 10. And that could be why they have the massive argument, because Bonnie realises that while she cares about Jo, she has to let her go, because Jo will be against Bonnie getting sterilised and having children. All of these three things then link up, because in the relationship with Jo, it could show that she is suicidal, because she has to let Jo go to do what she has to do, so she doesn't commit suicide, because she knows that if she has a child, then she will. And it could also show that she's depressed, because she reaches out to again to Jo even after they've broken up, knowing that they'll probably break up again. And within her relationship with Jo, it's very confusing and awkward, because she could be autistic. For example, when Jo first walks in scene 4, she's very awkward, she doesn't say anything, and she barely says anything until after she said that she doesn't like fish. And then again, in scene 9, she doesn't seem to understand that Jo is there to try and get back with her until the very end, when Jo says that not being with her is worse. I feel like throughout the entire play, there's a journey almost, and an exploration as to whether these things are true or not, as to whether she is autistic, because while she shows a lot of symptoms, it could just be the way she acts, and because of her past, it doesn't necessarily mean that she is autistic. She could just have social anxiety or be bad at social cues. And on the suicidal part, she might not be suicidal at the moment, but she could recognise that she might become suicidal if she ever has children. So while it might have been passed on from her previous generations, it might not be how she feels at the moment. Much like Anna, when before she had Bonnie, she was quite normal and happy. And then as soon as she had Bonnie, she went off the rails completely. And then with Jo, there is definitely an exploration as to how Bonnie would act towards her, because depending on how you answer these questions, it could completely change how you act in these scenes. For a lot of the scenes, I definitely went more towards the autistic route and tried to show it in a subtle way. However, I didn't really go for the depressed or suicidal one, just because I felt like while Bonnie may be completely struggling to deal with everything that she has to, I feel like she still would be able to keep control of herself and understand that she has to be normal for herself, and so that she doesn't go off the rails like her predecessors. And for Jo, I definitely think she does care about her. She just shows it in a completely unusual way. And while she may use Jo as a support, she also uses her just to confide in and to finally express her emotions after she's bottled them up for so long. And even though expressing these emotions may not be the best for their relationship, it's the best for Bonnie, and I think Jo realises that at the same time.